World Around Summit. Please welcome to the stage Eric Chen.
Great. Hello. Thanks for coming back for this second session. I'm Eric Chen, the General and Artistic Director of Het Nieuwe Instituut, or the New Institute, which is the Dutch National Museum and Institute of Architecture, Design, and Digital Culture in Rotterdam. On behalf of also my colleague Flora van Hallen, our head of programs, and our other colleagues at the New Institute, we're really thrilled to have partnered on this summit with the World Around and the Guggenheim. As Beatrice sort of alluded to earlier today, originally there was going to be a part one of today's summit last weekend in Rotterdam to be followed up by part two today. Unfortunately, a lockdown in the Netherlands got in the way, and so we have moved that to this June 11th. So we hope all of you can join us then for that rescheduled session, whether in Rotterdam or online. In the meantime, I'm really thrilled to introduce this afternoon's second session, which is Ice, Stone, Sand, and Other Archives. Now, already today there have been a number of references to past, present, and future, which makes sense for this summit, which is looking at the now, near, and next. And suffice it to say that we, of course, as always, exist in the present, but also, as always, embedded within that are the past and the future, because it's in the present that we not only reflect upon, but also contest and, in fact, construct the past and the future, but the ways in which we do that are constantly changing. Now, at this moment of extreme challenges and uncertainties, the speakers in this session all show us a wide range of ways of looking at and approaching histories and memory, both intangible and intangible ways, as archives, narratives, and speculations, and importantly, through a range of different human and non-human subjectivities and knowledges. Because indeed, as there is no single way of looking at the past, present, and future, in the same way that there is no singular past, present, and future. And on that note, we hope you will be as inspired by these presentations as we are. So thank you.
なんか今年の中で面白い建築物かなんかをこうちょっとずつこうゲットしてなんか放映しようとしようね。
そうですね。アラウンド・ザ・ワールドっていうことですね。
アラウンド・ザ・ワールド。ブースでこまで喋ったらいいな。
そうなんです。
はい、わかりました。いいですか。
はい、どうぞ。
ちょうど2014年の秋にバリに行った時に、その前からピノーさんって方が、交渉をしていて設計を始まってたところに私がパリへ行ってお会いしたいと言ったところ、なんか話聞いてるのかとお言ってきたので、いや聞いてないと。実はブスデコマースっていう穀物の取引所があると。これを政府から借りて美術館にしたいと言われたんで、すぐに一緒に見に行きました。さすがにもう200年近く前のもんですから、だけどこの何が今のものと違うこういうと非常に大胆な建築ですね。60メーターぐらいの円筒の上に大きなそのガラスの天蓋があって、下に絵があって、そして円形のホールがあるというような建物ですごいなと。基本的にこういう建築物を再利用するとは難しいんですよ。どうしても前の建物を保存せないかん。前の建物を補修して保存せないかん。で今の場合でいうと補強せないかんというもんで、非常にやりにくいなと思いました。これを生まれ変わらせろと。 そしてこれからまた100年200年とパリの中心になるようにとならんかと言われましてね。思い出したのはローマにパンテオンというのがありますが、43メーターの円形の空間の中に、20世紀の間その多くの人たちに発信し続けたパンテオンのことを思い出してですね、これはパンテオンより大きいぞと。でこれを再利用するだけじゃなしに新しい世界をそこへ入れたらどうかと。この模型にあるようにですね、この円筒形の建物の真ん中にもう一つ新しい世界を入れたらどうかと。これは非常に難しいんですよ。なぜ難しいかというと、歴史的建造物の再利用というのは本来歴史的建造物を保存するというのが役割ですから、歴史的建造物の保存と同時に新しい世界が入るというのはね、私も少しぐらいは分かってますから難しいだろうと。この難しいのは一つはですね、歴史の研究家がいると、材料の研究家がいると、構造の人もいると、そして装飾の人もいると、絵があります、装飾の人がいると、そして200年近く前の天蓋、ガラスの天蓋がありますから、こういうディティールを直していかないかんというのがいりますから、我々が描いた絵をそれぞれの人が分析してそれぞれの人が前へ進めていかないかん。割とギクシャクせんとスムーズにいく部分もあったんですよ。反対もいっぱいあったんですよ。なんであんなも入れんねんと、こんなんも入れんねんと、とんでもないという人もいるし、新しい命を入れないとこの建物は生き返らないという人もいると。で結局こういう建造物ですからね、円というのはね、建築の原点なんですよ。正方形、三角形、円というのはね、建築の原点の形をしている。この中にもう一つ新しい世界を入れようというので、こういうことを考えたんですね。この中にもう一個一つ入れると、地下を改造して、これはね通らないと思ったんですよ。新しい世界入れるとまたガスって構造体力上大丈夫かというような問題もありますし、でいろいろと打ち合わせしながら上の空間をやり直さないかんということを考えていたら、我々が思っているよりも割とスムーズに前へ行った。それは多分ピノーさんのこの建築に対する思いがフランス政府パリ市に伝わっていったんだろうなと。工事中こんなんですよ。もうね、もっといいことにですね、ルーブルの向かいでしょ。でちょうどこちらにはポンピドーセンターがありますから、ルーブルブースでコマースポンピドーセンターと、その真ん中にあるからね、どうしても中心的に見えると。考えてみたらフランスは言うても印象派の前からずっとですけども、文化の中心フランスなんですね。その中でもう一つ新しい中心をというので、円形の真ん中はですね、普通は大体この真ん中のところには展示空間ですよ。この大きな真ん中がフリー空間なんです。でこのフリーというのはね、やっぱりこの建築に込めたピノーさんの勇気、ピノーさんの自由に対する精神といいますのは、現代美術が多いんですけども、現代美術というのはその作る人の勇気とその自由な精神が形になったもんですから、その自由な精神と同時にですね、こう勇気を持ったものをこう置いてもらうと。それでぐるーっと周りの展示空間を見ると。 いろいろと仕掛けがありまして、両方サイドには20螺旋の空間がある、階段があると。これも完全に元へ補修し直すと。天外は全部やり直すと。初めの予算で行くのと。で私は日本でおりますから知らん顔してて、どないかなるやろうと。もう知りませんよという形でずっと進んでいってびっくりしたのは、最終的にはこういう空間になってですね、空間体験するだけで面白いですよ。一点ですからね、円は中心は。その中心の一点の外にコンクリートの壁がいる。壁の向こうに200年前のいわゆる壁がいると。その向こうに見えないけどもぐるっと回るのは展示空間というので、何十にも構造になってるわけですよ。普通は美術館いうのは展示空間の箱が並んでいる中にいると、これはちゃうんですね。でそれはやっぱり何よりも公共的な空間っていうのは多くの可能性を満ちてないからね。公共性のあるいは可能性があるということ、自由と勇気がここにあると。美術館というのは可能性のある場所でなかったか。でこれはね、反対がいっぱい出るんですよ。可能性あるだけにいらんやろうと、これいらんやろうと言うてくるんですよ。なかなかそこを乗り越えていかなかった。現代美術というものだけじゃなしに、美術とね建築ってのは難しいんですよ。美術家はこういうものを自分の思っているものを発表したい。建築の設計も自分の思っている空間を発表したい。ぶつかるんですよ。だから美術家と我々が仲良く共存することはないと思うんですよ。共存しない方がいいんですよ、ぶつかったら。現代美術と建築が喧嘩してる状態じゃないといかん。で世界中にホワイトボックスという白い箱の中に展示空間があるやつはですね、喧嘩しないね。スマートやで。じゃなしにあえて喧嘩する方に行くと。これは特殊なもんですからね。世界中の多くの人たちが我々の空間を好まない。一部好む人はいるけどもほとんど好まないんですよ。ホワイトキューブの方がいい。だから我々はそのホワイトキューブじゃない違う世界をずっとやってきたんですが、面白いというやつはちょっとおるけどね、それはもちろん。でそれもいろいろじゃないですか。そういう中で建築というものが成立するんじゃないかと。でそれにはね、やっぱクライアントが思いなかった。この大波を越えてこの山を登って向こうに越えていきたいという思いがないとあかんねん。日本で子どもの図書館を作ってますが、その前にいつもこのリンゴを置いとる。青いリンゴ。この青いリンゴは何かと言いますと、100歳まで元気で長生き。元気で長生きの一番大きな点は好奇心なんですよ。で人間の体力を持ち続けて100歳まで元気で長生きするためにはやっぱり文化的な教養でいるんですよ。で好奇心もいると、そういうものに挑戦するということを考えて、まずこの青いリンゴを目指していけという話で青いリンゴをあちこちに置いとるわけですけども、それは多くの人たちの希望なんですよ。長生きで元気で好奇心旺盛でというのは、全ての人の、願望じゃないですか。その願望を形にしたものはこれなんです。そこでやっぱりまず何よりも仕事にはねチームがいると。で仕事には社会的なメッセージがいると。これはこの公共性メッセージがいると。 ね、それからそれを支えてくれる友人がいると。でこれがみんなうまいこと集まってね、建築屋さん技術者の人たち残したいと思ってるわけや。で公共的なものは残るわけですよ。私の個人の家これ残らないですけどね、個人を超えた公共性、例えばまあ基本的にはその建築いうのは生まれ変わって生まれ変わって生まれ変わって残っていくもんなんですね。のがまあ公共性なんです。ローマのパンテオンまだ生きとるからね。でこの建築も生かしたいと。その時にここに出会いの空間ですから、出会いは必ずハプニングがあるわけですよ。あの人と会いたないのにバタッと目の前におるからね、パブリックいうものは。で自分とは遠い世界である現代美術というのは前にいる。何やこれと。でそこで頭が動く。でこれからの世界はおそらく物を生産して売る時代はあると。けど片っぽで人間が楽しく好奇心に満ちて生きていく世界がないと難しいと。まあ空間体験が大切というもあるけども、ともかく生きることは大事なんですよ。生きることが一番。その生きることのエネルギーは体力と好奇心、そして未来。未来では希望やん。希望はね、他人が作ってくれない。自分で作らないと。だから我々は希望のあるものを作りたいと。それしかないの。はい、終わり。
Please welcome to the stage Rania Gosen.
That counteract the effects of anthropogenic climate change by deliberately intervening in Earth systems. Climate scientists and policymakers are deeply divided over which forms of geoengineering to pursue, if any. What follows is a story in 5 chapters that makes present such speculative technologies. Each chapter paints a portrait of an Earth following the deployment of one such promissory technology. The Planet After Geoengineering is an installation of drawings, a graphic novel, an animation, and, for the time of today, a short story. Petrified carbon. Can the planet have its carbon cake and eat it too? The fossil fuel industry promotes carbon dioxide, carbon and sequestration in depleted oil and gas reservoirs. More oil out, more carbon dioxide in, more revenue for the largest polluters. The Earth trembles and cracks under pressure. The oil industry repurposes its pipelines and tankers into a carbon storage infrastructure. The oceans, the Earth's largest carbon sink, absorb 1/3 of humanity's carbon dioxide emissions, making them more acidic and harmful to marine life. Fully loaded tankers roam the oceans, capturing carbon dioxide emissions in open water algae plantations. The city is a carbon capture machine for living in. Smog-eating towers capture carbon dioxide. A fleet of carbon scrubbers runs down facades. A large volume of CO2 is pulled beneath to the city of the captive carbon globe. A repurposed Cold War nuclear shelter, the city is a recovery plant that compresses carbon in a high-pressure, high-temperature process and turns it into a yellowish diamond. The carat is the new measurement unit of the carbon footprint. City air makes one carbon-free, they say. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. The exposed darker areas of seawater and soil absorb more solar radiation, leading to further warming. Bands of reflective glass beads are applied to slow the meltdown. Yet, an ice-free summer looms over the horizon. Less sea ice is more ship traffic. Vessels plant their flags on the seabed to lay claims to oil and gas reserves below the ice. Permafrost thaw releases hundreds of millions of years of buried carbon and methane from the peatlands into the atmosphere. To restore the Earth's white pole, seawater is pumped onto floating dome structures. Methane bubbles up through soil and water and is trapped in biomes with methane-eating bacteria. Herds of large herbivores are released onto the tundra to create vast grasslands. Extinct woolly mammoths are cloned and introduced as well. The grazers stomp thick topsoil, protecting the carbon-rich permafrost. Extreme wildfires consume the old-growth boreal forests. Forests become green deserts as monoculture tree plantations expand to meet the growing demand for cross-laminated timber. Indigenous guardians rekindle with prescribed burns, setting off controlled fires within cleared perimeters. The woodland caribou is in the crossfire. The word for word is forest, still. The Alaska-based high-frequency transmitter facility harvests methane emissions from a giant snow globe, an aurora borealis of tiny particles across the sky. The energy-intensive operation is powered by natural gas from the North Slope Petroleum Reserve. Climate change deniers collect even more fortunes. Rainmaking artificially induces precipitation by dispersing substances into the cloud. Rainmaking is also used as a weapon. Operation Popeye was a military cloud seeding project carried out by the US Air Force during the Vietnam War in order to disrupt North Vietnamese military supplies by softening surfaces and causing landslides. All military or hostile use of environmental modification techniques was subsequently banned by the United Nations in 1977. Extreme droughts and global warming have spurred a renewed interest in the pattern modification of vapor flows. Operation Sky River melts snow and channels high moisture bands of air from the Tibetan Plateau to mitigate drought and irrigate the Gobi Desert. The resulting rain is promised to be life-saving, literally avoiding a great famine for billions of people. Tens of thousands of crystal-like fuel-burning chambers blast silver iodide into the atmosphere. Political strife grows between highlands and lowlands as they compete to secure freshwater resources. Storm kings perform ritual dances and light great fires to invoke rain. Countries that heavily rely on the river basins quarrel the skies for rain. The rainmakers of today prime clouds with particles of silver iodide. The water cycle is a zero-sum game. Increased rainfall in one region is moisture missed elsewhere. The free silver ion is extremely toxic in aquatic environment. A spiral jetty of dead juvenile fish emerges from the water. Climate scientists debate the use of solar radiation management techniques. Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb, proposes injecting sulfate aerosol into the atmosphere to reflect sunlight away from Earth. The thickening shroud of particle mimics the solar shield of volcanic dust to recreate the global cooling effects of the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora. Operation Sulfur Storm detonates the Cold War nuclear arsenal in the magma chambers of tropical volcanoes. Balloons, kites, drones, aircrafts, and naval artillery continuously spew millions of tons of tiny sulfate particles into the sky. The UN issues a non-binding resolution on the use of this environmental modification technique. skies become less blue. A bright afterglow is a familiar sight at sunset. The cloud gravitates into equatorial orbit. Saturn-like rings circle the Earth. Clouds of ash deplete the ozone layer, reversing decades of recovery following the Montreal Protocol. The exhaustion of the ultraviolet shield has dire implications for life on Earth. Aerosol particles make it hard to breathe. A crystal vivarium is a refuge for the 1.5 billion winners of geoengineering. 4 times this number are left standing outside. The continuous conveyor drywall city converts excess sulfur dioxide into synthetic gypsum, wallboard, plaster, and soil additives. Sulfur dioxide inhibits photosynthesis, so the same sulfate production line filters the air for sensitive species. A dust cloud, a giant shield that protects the atmosphere from 2% of solar radiation, offsets the warming effects of greenhouse gas emissions. It orbits in equilibrium between Earth and the sun. The shield is an artificial constellation of dust that is mined from near-Earth asteroids. The empty capsules cross paths with Earth-orbiting junkyard of satellites. Large robotic arms extend to capture them. The compacted junkyard is polished into a space-based solar power plant that beams energy to Earth. The heliobeam is also a sun gun that concentrates enough energy onto a point to make an ocean boil or a city burn. The thick dust and smoke dull the starry sky. All wars on life begin by attacking the respiratory system. The terror of geoengineering is to be forced to live intimately with the death of the atmosphere, contemplating suffocation as a real possibility. The respirator goddess chokes as she blows the breath of life into the planet. I'll tell you something about stories, she said. They aren't just entertainment. Don't be fooled. They are all we have, you see, all we have to fight off illness and death. Dust plumes close in an artificial eclipse. Much of humanity is caught in the stranglehold of sulfur and dust storms. Swirling whirls of dust sweep through barren lands. The Earth deserves palliative care. Welcome to the climate emergency.
Please welcome to the stage Himali Singh Soin.
Hi everyone, I'm Himali, and I'm going to tell you the story of a series of multidisciplinary works from the North and South Pole. In 2017, I went to the Svalbard archipelago off the coast of Norway and the Antarctic Peninsula on a research expedition. I expected the popular imagination of a blank white landscape, but what I got was these terracotta clay mud in the wake, left behind in the wake of receding glaciers. I suddenly realized that the poles weren't some distant theirs, but entangled here's. I recognized in that brown mud myself, and I saw a sense of loss. Though recently inhabited by modern scientific research stations, both of these places are uninhabited by indigenous human life. So I was wondering where the myths were, where are the legends of this place? And I realized quickly that actually there is a kind of indigenous wise elder that has preserved all of the stories of this land, and that is the ice itself. But the ice was losing its language and its stamina to tell these stories fast enough. And that became the conceit of We Are Opposite Like That, stories told from the perspective of ice and other lesser-known voices. So I built this character that became a kind of medium to tell these stories. She looks like a futuristic alien wandering through this landscape, a landscape used by NASA for outer space simulation experiments. She's wandering here in a coal mine left by the Soviets and suddenly feels a kind of friendship with its blackness. She feels it in its speculative heat, her equatorial self feels some kind of familial home. And so these climate narratives in these stories become complicated. She recognizes her complicities with fossil fuels, and here starts to emerge a kind of post-colonial character. The excerpt of the film that I will show you next tells a story of the very real Victorian obsession that the ice from the Arctic would descend into the British Empire and wipe out the empire and leave it into a frozen wasteland. The music that you'll hear is a score for string quartet, and its tempo and dynamics are coded so that you hear the temperature variances between the Victorian times and now, as well as the latitudes and the longitudes of my own journey. A clear inverted mountain floating above the horizon. For historians, the present had lost itself over time. There were no shadows, echoes of no surface. Nobody left to be beautiful. The ghost of what was to come singed. Later on in the film, my character begins to wander through the ruins of colonialism and begins to empathize with ice so deeply that she becomes ice and finally disappears. This is a landscape of ghosts, specters, and spirits. Magic realism is always at play. Though it seemed unlikely, the geopoetic links between the subcontinent and the poles became clear to me as I researched them further. The Arctic gusts influenced the Indian monsoon. The subcontinent was neighboring Antarctica during Pangaea before the continental drift. And now they house common microorganisms between each other. So subcontinentment came out as a kind of South Asian futurist manifesto, using the materiality of ice to posit joy despite the strife, to propose the possibility of narrative still for us, even in the South. Subcontinentment is anti-extinction. It proposes radical survival, inhabiting the architecture of loopholes. Subcontinentment looks up toward the Arctic, where maybe the Vedas found home in the low sun and the early moon, and maybe not. Subcontinentment looks downward toward the Antarctic, with whom it shared edges and borders way back when in Pangaea. It finds common fossils, one of them an embossed Ficus religiosa. It finds mica, which shimmers like something far and rare. Subcontinentment says, go there. Huddle close together, against the wind. Pleasure, even at the end. We are opposite like that. This is an ikat tapestry woven with the sound waves that you just heard, and the history of black and brown bodies and other freaks at the poles. The almanac then kind of becomes a culmination of all these stories. It starts both ways and ends in the middle, and is a messy collection of missing paraphernalia from the archives, its false philosophies, made-up maps, astronomical observations, astrological readings, theories, recipes, small resistances. It tells the story of an amazing colonial endeavor of British mining marble and then the permafrost evaporating and the marble turning to dust. It tells the stories of unrequited love, of how the aurora borealis might look like writing, of the history of a Caribbean slave on the bow of the boat, the history of hybrid beings and freaks in Antarctica. It tells the story of how the only backup plan that the world had for an apocalypse was the seed bank in Svalbard that contains all the seeds from every nation in the world, and while I was there, it flooded. It tells the story, how to startle the unbelieving, tells the story of how the British Empire used a 13-year-old clairvoyant girl from Calcutta to travel to the Arctic with her mind in search of Franklin and his lost men. There's only a single archive from the 1850 left of her, and this was an erasure and an attempt to give her voice. Boatness is another manifesto from these journeys, because these are places of not knowing. These are places where the mist hangs low and the fog sets in, and despite the perfect clarity of glacial water, truth is up to anybody. Not knowing becomes a way of being, and boatness became a way of thinking about how we might use a kind of feminine intuition as a critical method. It, in a way, it also thinks about how when different kinds of knowledges. So how when first the chronometer fails, you look up at the stars to know directions. The stars are clouded over, so you look and you listen to your kidneys. It becomes a way of accessing knowledge through different modalities. And finally, upcoming is a bird opera called An Omniscience, about a bird called the Arctic tern that flies from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back every year. It's the longest migration in the history of any species. And in its lifetime, it makes a trip to the moon and back 3 times, equivalent of. And this opera becomes a way of thinking about wind and horizons and air and circulation, a manifesto about drifting as a way of getting to our goals, moving with the divergences. And it also makes us think about collectivity and flocking, something that We Are Opposite Like That has depended on so many amazing musicians and dancers and historians and botanists. And then I guess upcoming is me thinking, after you go to the poles, where do you go next? You go home. And home is the Himalayas, after whom I'm named as well. So the first of these series is called Static Range, about a nuclear spy device that was planted by the CIA along with the Indian intelligence on a mountain named Nanda Devi, and the device has gone missing. It's also a series of interdisciplinary works that move between epistolary exchanges, bioremedic planting, healing, videos, sound, tapestries, and ceramic. As Grand as What is a series of rituals in the Himalayas to regain the kind of center of the earth chakras. And finally, there's the little pocketbook of ancestors, of deities that have been left out of the Himalayan canon and still protest the same voice of ice, in some ways saying, listen, we must insist on this language. We are the language that lasts and the language that could bring us together to a different kind of future. And insisting on their agency and their stories, we can say perhaps they are the thing that sustains while the new love comes. Thank you.
I'm Li Hu, and this is my partner Huang Wenjing. We're from Open Architecture.
The exciting thing of doing architecture is you can imagine up unexisted things and then giving form. But you have to have someone to support you and support your vision.
The client is Aranya, who we worked together for the Dune Art Museum.
And they approached us with this rather unique commission of designing an outdoor performance venue in the valley where they're hoping to develop a new kind of community. It's a rather underdeveloped area because the original residents, the villagers, all left. But there's this new wave of revitalizing the area.
What's different from the Dune Museum for Art, when we're designing a space for the art, art requires a pretty strict climate control, versus music and sound is something carries a different quality. Sound is very spatial and formless, and sound doesn't require climate control.
Right.
Really, what kind of space the sound requires? It begins the whole journey of design for something that is not quite common. But for us, it's a great opportunity because it's just an exciting challenge, a space for music in the side of the valley.
I think what's really impressed me is the raw and the rough, the barren quality of this mountain. It has very harsh winters. It's really not a comfortable place for human to reside. And also, if you look carefully at the formation of the rocks in this mountain, you realize it's this situation, the whole thing is not like so stable. There's a kind of fragility or the erosion of time, of wind, of harsh conditions that are happening in the landscape, which actually sort of required us to do something very carefully. So what we came to do was to put something there with minimal footprint to land as light as possible on the flat part of the valley.
The two things are fundamentally important for us to begin the project, and I think the two major focus. One is obviously sound. That is really the purpose of the project. But the other is the mountain, the valley. What really can we do that is belongs to the site, as if it's born from the site, and that carries or it relates and have an interesting dialogue with the spirit of the valley.
Also, what I remember, what really shocked me in a way is to discover the dilapidated Great Wall.
Yeah.
That among the wild vegetation in the mountain, and you realize that hundreds or thousands of years ago, there's human being here, and then made construction. This Great Wall is not what the tourists of China are used to. This part of Great Wall is off the beaten path, and it's really hidden in the mountain areas. Very few people get to visit it.
What's interesting about the Great Wall is that it has an intricate relationship with the landscape. That is amazing or unbelievable how they built literally into the mountains.
Yeah.
It's just basically follow the ridge of the mountain.
What I also felt was, that was a defensive gesture. It's human being against other human being, and human being against nature. But you see it's being almost all destroyed by nature, eroded. You read the power of nature, how the Great Wall, built with thick bricks, all crumbled and falling apart, and you read the power of nature, against man's wish. Well, I think in a way we're at a different age. Instead of against, maybe we build something that can coexist with nature, that can endure the weathering, the harshness of nature. Now we are at the time the building is built, and we are more of in a reflection process. So a lot of things that we can talk about in a more logical way.
There's two forces, the intuition and the analytical, logical process.
Right.
In this case, the intuitive forces perhaps just our reaction to the site. But the other force that is quite logical in this case is the very functional purpose to create a space for sound. That we call it chapel of sound. It comes from the core of the stage and the audience, the performer and observer. It can also provide a space for much larger concert. That is what's given by the site. It happens to have the gentle slope, So in the summer, it will be like the summer stage in the Central Park in New York City. The space also a place for looking out into the valley, the beauty of the valley and the Great Wall. This part of the mountain carries some kind of special spirit, a strong spirit living in the valley.
We were inspired by the landscape, but we don't want it to just mimic a rock. I want people to read that it's an artificial, human-built structure.
At the very, very beginning, we have decided to use concrete as the building material. It's the best material to build anything monolithic, seamless.
But we are also very aware of the embodied energy in concrete. You know, whenever we can, we reduce the amount of concrete we use as much as possible in our projects. You know, it looks simple, look monolithic, but actually it integrated all the modern, contemporary technologies in terms of structure, mechanical, theater equipment, lighting adjustment, and all that control system. It's all embedded in this simple-looking structure.
Sophistication under the simplistic image. It's the precision also disguised under the roughness.
You know, to us at this time, that we're all overwhelmed by imagery from internet and social media. So there's also a reflective process going on. You know, what's more essential at this time? To me, it's, you know, reconnect with our human senses. You know, what we can sense. We can sense the cold, the temperature, the harsh wind, the texture, and the hearing. So it's, in a way, if this building can achieve something, I think if it can draw people here, you leave your digital equipment at home, and here come to feel yourself again. You can listen to the murmuring of nature. I think this is important both in our self-reflective process, also in terms of what we want this building to do for other people.
The world's full of gigantic spaces. Here, you can feel it, that is the human scale, the human relationship. It's very important.
I think the art of architecture is always trying to balance the freedom of imagination and the restriction from realities. And this creates tension. And the tension is often a good thing. The tension pushes you to find solutions. Such kind of thing is what we often encounter in the design of a building.
When I was 18, my father decided to put me on a ditch digging crew, which I found really crazy at the time, that he was actually going to do. He thought he was going to make a man out of me. And the ditch digging crew was supposed to segue into a construction job. It's like surreal. I mean, I'm, you know, pretty girly, and like that was like, what was going? I mean, I know what was going on. He couldn't deal with my gayness. I got to New York and I met a bunch of other gay teenage runaways, which are this bunch here eventually. That was who I hung around with. That was who I lived with. That was the world I knew. The reality of the thing when it comes up through the body itself and the heart and soul of the person, it's a much bigger deal. And that again is the basis of art. And us dancing with each other at the Stonewall, when they raided the place that night, that's why people fought back, because they were going to take that away. I'm human.
I knew it from the mid-60s and through the 70s that Marsha always gave this blessed presence and encouragement to be who you wanted to be. Be who you wanted to be. Be who you wanted to be.
Friends and many people who knew Marsha called her Saint Marsha because she was so generous and she was such a good person.
She would sort of hold court in Sheridan Square and saying, we're in the village, we're free. Live.
And if I hope nobody cries, you know, get up, dance, party, have a good time.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Rivera. I'm a transgender person and a Stonewall Riot veteran. Inspector Pine, who was the head of this squad, gave orders for them to pull out their guns and to come out shooting if they had to. That's how scared they were of us that evening. I saw the anger of the people that were getting beat up and they had blood on their faces and on their bodies. They did not run away. They kept on coming back for more. We just kept on coming back. We didn't care if we got killed because we knew we had to fight for what we believed in, and it was our life. To see the beauty of my people to be free that next day meant so much to me.
Who's Stormy? I'm a human being that survived. I've helped other people survive. If the white kids were beating me up, black kids were beating, everybody was jumping on it. If it wasn't because of my father's money, it was being black, being a Negro with a white face. So he told me if I didn't stop running, I'd be running the rest of my life. When I was 15, I stopped running, and I haven't run a day since.
I always consider the dancing as the center of gay life, dancing together. That's our spiritual center. Dancing together, dancing together, dancing together.
Please welcome to the stage Dominique Petit-Frere.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dominique Petit-Frere, and I am the founder of Limbo Accra, alongside my partner, Emile Grip. Limbo Accra is a collaborative spatial design studio founded in 2018, offering a large and flexible outlet for experimentation in public art, design, and architectural production. As some of you might know, African cities are experiencing high rates of modernization. Property bubbles and escalating real estate prices are a defining feature of global cities around the world, and spaces in Ghana are no exception. Changing identities and influx of building projects are leaving the urban spaces in Accra caught in a state of limbo. Anxiously waiting modern futures while fossilized with fragments of the past. We are living in a new age of existence. For the first time, one species has come to define the geology of an era, the Anthropocene, an epoch defined by human activity, like the fossilized skeletons left behind by dinosaurs. Concrete skeletons make up the urban landscape of Accra, waiting to be excavated and explored, a space we call Afropocenia. Spaces both large and small are left hesitant and purposeless, unsure of their present, unaware of their potential, trapped between past and future, often for years on end. The meaning and purpose of these concrete limbo structures were never really manifested, and their signal to society is an even more brutal example of capitalism in an urban setting. This is the world of limbo, a world that leaves the questions and responsibility of the urban reality for architects, designers, artists to reconfigure. How will we seize the opportunities to create cities by and for the people? Will it be inclusive and intentional, or exploitive and speculative? What does the future of African cities look like? And can we believe that we are a generation that can change things? Or is the current optimism solely based on the always prevailing energy from any youth generation? Strategies of architectural upcycling, resurrecting derelict liminal spaces as such, through artistic intervention is our primary medium. For us, art is a mirror for society, an invitation for the individual to question what they see. It has the ability to distort, enhance, and degrade what we consider normal or reality altogether, and it allows us to speculate on the possibilities nestled within the future of our continent. As a response to the liminal, we sought to reimagine and redefine what the urban setting of Accra could exist as. This was manifested through the Adringano activation, Yosu Scene, the genesis of our practice. The activation as a focal point functioned to showcase our potential as a new generation of designers and visionaries realizing equitable futures within our cities and what could be defined as a new Black Renaissance. This practice we came to attribute as urban acupuncture, triggering positive chain reaction in our spaces. For our activation, we invited 9 contemporary Ghanaian artists from around the world to present works that reflect the urban fate of our society and discover different forms of artistic practice that allows us to deal with the architecture, archives, materials, infrastructure, and ideas of our built environment through sculptures, installations, and interventions. This is called the Adringano activation. The yellow Kufor gallons you see here by artist Serge Atukwe are filling out the voids of the uncompleted home to make it complete and whole again. For us, we were very interested in how this installation produced a new form of life, a new phenomenon in terms of new energy within the space. We weren't just embodying/consuming the space as the building, but rather the potential it holds, the archive that lives within it, and the archive that we're building for the future. Here is another shot from the installation. Pictured is one of the student housing complex of the KNUST University Art Department in Kumasi, which is another city in Ghana. This photo was taken by artist Hakeem Adam, as it was built within the early independent era of Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, during the modernist rush in the country. The aesthetic and structure of the building is a celebration of African architecture via the tropical, modernist, and brutalistic tropes of the time. This image and sculptural body of work is also a nod to the repurposing and upcycling of waste found in our country, oceanic waste. Similar to that of the previous slide, Patrick Turkson works seek to alter the language and perception of waste and clothing items, specifically flip-flops, as you've seen here, that has been cut and applied and configured together to create this beautiful tapestry, transforming it into a renewed artifact. Lastly, pictured here is the work of one of our very close collaborators, David Alabo. The material degradation of the site is a contrast to the futuristic surreal work, creating a strong juxtaposition between the former, the present, and the coming. The reconfiguration of art through decayed materials as a way of telling a story is something that is important to us in our practice, especially in terms of how we think about the social and architectural structures and the elements of potential around it. So through our practice of activating incomplete spaces in Accra, we've been able to translate this spatial occurrence into an actual built practice that is being manifested in various building projects within our city right before our eyes. One being Freedom Skate Park, West Africa's first recreational skate park. The skate park and its mission to become a central piece of recreational landscape infrastructure was in its essence the most natural project for Limbo to take lead on. This is because of the absence of recreational spaces in Accra for citizens across the social spectrum to meet on an equitable level. For us, our intention was to carve out a public space in Accra where we can bridge the different class structures within the city to connect with each other and exchange experiences democratically through a sport like skateboarding. Specifically, the design straddles the line between two ambitions. One where everything is skatable, and the other where everything is open, green, and recreational. Freedom Skate Park will offer a community-planted garden space, a skate shop, a co-working hub built with contemporary and local construction techniques as part of its on-site facilities. The park's epicenter, which is the skate house, will actively function as the skate park's headquarters. The park is intended to act as a laboratory for social change, inspired globally, created locally. At its core, this project is centered on collaboration, local and diasporic collaboration. From the Ghanaian skate collective Surf Ghana, to Daily Paper, the late Virgil Abloh's design studio Alaska Alaska and Off-White, and to the Ghanaian-based rammed earth specialist group Hive Earth. We have all approached this project with the idea of unity. Together we are stronger, and has been a truly beautiful exchange for us as a design studio, a young design studio, allowing us to bridge together the new generation of designers and visionaries in a contemporary format fitted for Africa's youth. This cultural renaissance particularly has allowed our studio to appeal to a returning diaspora, a new generation of young visionaries that are looking to build a better future for our nation. That means re-articulating new cultural forms and ideas within our built environment to redistribute cultural, societal, and economic capital in order to produce new futures. For us, we find it very important to do this work, because if not, we can only question when we look at the city of Accra, what will be left for the next generations to come when our land is already littered by failed capitalism. That's why we at Limbo are constantly challenging ourselves with the logic of rethinking how to produce new architectural forms in a contemporary African landscape and beyond. Continuing on from our research and practice of embodying Limbo in West Africa, we have taken things digitally by partnering with IBA Camp from the Royal College of Arts in London to scan various sites in Limbo, creating a digital concrete Limbo archive. Our mission is to build an interactive and immersive digital portal of sites in Limbo across Africa and at various scales, starting from Accra and Freetown, Sierra Leone. And as you can see here, this is a digital scan of the building that we started the presentation with. By entering the digital realm, we are consciously trying to understand the world's reconfiguration into a digital space, the metaverse, where entire cities are being built and even land is being sold. What is the position of these structures in the space, we ask? Will we see buildings and sites abandoned in the metaverse in some form of phantom urbanism? I mean, the future of this space is unknown, but in a way, it's just the next step of this anthropocentric trajectory we speak of, a world 100% defined by Homo sapiens. For us, we have a unique desire to understand and explore how we as urbanists, designers, and artists can create new spatial artifacts that honor our vision while orienting us towards the future. We are developing a number of examples of 3D scans in Accra and other West African cities presented in a digital format. This archive will be interactive and highlight views, timelines, scale, accessibility, informal lifespan, dissolving details, borders, visibility of each individual site, and so on. Eventually, all the 3D models will form a digital city and eventually a digital continent to which users can explore, inhabit, and roam. To end, I will leave you with a few minutes, or a minute or two, exploring the beta version of our new digital city to be. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm Winnie Maas. I'm the M of MVRDV. I'm architect, landscape architect and urbanist. And I made recently the depot, and I would like to invite you to join me on this tour to give you an impression on the why and how of the first, say, public depot in the world. Please join me. The depot has landed here in the Rotterdam Museum Park, which is actually a series of gardens that are connected to each other on the base of a concept of Rem Koolhaas and Yves Brunier in the end of the 80s. It is a place that is actually surrounded by many institutions. When I walk you around, you can see here the Unilever building, you see the hospital, you see the Kunsthal of Rem, you see here the Boijmans van Beuningen, the other gardens, and you see the Het Nieuwe Instituut, the HNY on the other side. So how to do that? And how to make a building that on one hand loves the park, that wants to embrace it, a very classical issue. How can we make buildings that love the landscape? And secondly, that is somehow not reflecting on the other buildings, or not in a, that doesn't take, say, the architecture of the others for granted. And that leads to a building that on one hand is round, you can walk around, and secondly, it has almost no footprint. It touches the planet, say, slightly. And that compensates the green by having a forest on the roof. And last but not least, by covering it with mirrors, now you can look around. You can look around the corner. You can see yourself. You can see the forest behind you. You can see the whole park, and you can see the city. And somehow then you give the city back, and that it becomes of us in that way. And maybe that's one of the ways of turning an enclosed operation, an archive, into a collective body. So the depot is landed on a pavement, and we call it the canvas of the city. So when you project in the evening, you see projections coming from Pipi Lotti Riest's artwork. on the canvas, it reflects in the building, and you are in a kind of three-dimensional piece of art. You walk as Alice in Wonderland in suddenly this three-dimensionalization. Now we are close to the depot. The depot stretches above you. It is, goes down and touches the earth horizontally, showing that actually the building is founded on just a couple of piles, because below the water needs to continue. It is part of our, say, new climate protection scheme of of Rotterdam. Therefore, it looks almost like a boat, one could say. And it also avoids that water comes into the building, because all the art is a couple of stories up. And we decided on making like doors that are part of the mirror, that can open themselves smoothly. So you start here and then you look at yourself, and it takes the time for you to think about where you come from and where you're going to. And almost a bit like, say, Thunderbirds, it opens itself. Thunderbirds has landed somewhere in Rotterdam. Welkom in. We have arrived in the lowest part of the building, the entrance zone. Here our journey starts. The art drops down to this lowest floor. It is situated higher up to protect itself against climate change and floodings. And here I will drop my coat in the wardrobe that's done by an artist, John Kermeling. Here we enter the central atrium. It's a kind of a vertical street in the heart of the building that is surrounded by all the different archives, 5 stories high. And every archive is represented by doors and windows to the atrium. The archive is sorted by material, by sculptures, by paper, by photographs, by paintings that require this different kind of, say, circumstances or environments. And when you walk around and you go from window to window, from door to door, it feels almost like a city of art that you are facing. This atrium is surrounded by galleries, say streets, 50 types of room, different types of humidity, different types of light, different types of size, different size of temperature. One can enter all these depots in different ways. From the archives, different, say, pieces can be brought into the atrium, where we have made 15 different, say, glass boxes where paintings can be shown, or pottery can be shown, or specific art can be shown. And in between, the stairs zigzag up and down, the lifts go up and down, so that you can see the art from all sides. It's fantastic to see how in the back you can see who did made and when, and that unravels, say, where it comes from, or how it's treated, or how it's restored. All the things that are somehow normally hidden in our museums. It's a kind of zigzag road between the art, between the front and the back. We are in the street of restorations. There are many rooms for different climates to restore the different types of art. It means also that the public can see that the people that restore, the restorators, that they are also somehow public, and that they, I think it gives more knowledge of what they do. You can see the precision, also the time and the planning, how much time they need for making this into a beautiful piece again. Actually, the depot is a kind of city, almost, with streets where you explore them, this kind of encounters. You go further. We're entering one of the archives now. We do it together, so please open the door. I have to put on my coat here to protect the paintings against possible dust. Here, say, no curator has somehow organized this. This is organized by time, by technique. But I can open together with people from the museum any rack, and then we can explore its richness and its vastness. You look around, you pull out such a rack, and you see these strange combinations. So it's a completely different way of looking to art than in a museum. This is not a museum, this is an archive. It's actually a very democratic way of being with art or showing art, because you can pull wherever. You can select what you like. I wish that the Met or the MoMA would have such a kind of facade. The archive building, the depot, is actually a building that comes from dark up to light. Just look down. We have arrived on the roof, which is basically the replanted trees and birch trees, pine trees, high grasses. They're pre-trained in our countryside, and the roots are interconnected so that they make a rhizome against the wind. Windshields are there to guide the wind up over the buildings. Pockets are created to shelter against the wind. We're working on the garden to add more pine trees. And it reflects, the building reflects basically the nature, in same as downstairs, I would say, to make the forest even bigger. It is prepared for also another step in opening up the archive and bringing pieces into the grass and in between the grass. So this becomes a next installation for another artist, another curator that will monitor the gardens. So here, water is stored as part of the water management plan with a package of soil and drainage, and then taken into account by the trees. They are kept, they are evaporated, and that controls both the cooling of the building as, say, the water management system of the building. Of course, I dream actually that this would happen everywhere, and that this is the first step of a greenification of Rotterdam. It's a city that grew in the 19th and 20th century, that has been bombarded, and that now shows different energies of different times. And every piece of this building adds a respectful building in what I call the collection of Rotterdam. This is an urbanism that over time shows how to deal with new perspectives and combine that with the past. I hope this building contributes as a next step to that repertoire.
My name is David Chipperfield. I'm the principal of David Chipperfield Architects and responsible, I suppose, for the work of my collaborators and partners. I'm being asked to discuss and explain the project that my Berlin office did in the restoration of the Mies van der Rohe National Gallery. The gallery is important, the museum is important, I think, in two ways. One, in the history of architecture, of course, it's profoundly important, and it's important within his career as being one of the great icons of his life, and actually it was his last building. But it's also important in the history of Berlin. That's where this intersection is fascinating and, in a way, riddled with history, the history of Mies, the history of modern architecture, and the history of Berlin itself. Mies left Berlin before the war. Obviously, huge part of his career happened in the States. But he was invited back by Berlin, by the mayor, to build the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, it was an extraordinary commission, direct commission. He was even allowed to choose his own site. The citizens of Berlin were not, citizens of West Berlin, were not over convinced, I would say, by the project. In the intervening years, I think it's interesting how fond the city became of it. I would say it's not a building that's easy to like in a sort of popular way. I mean, us architects are completely, weak at the knees about it. You know, it's been called a petrol station, it's been insulted in all sorts of ways, and in the sense that I would say that while it was a very avant-garde building, it became subsumed in a general attitude towards modernism itself. It also wasn't without its criticism in museological terms. Building a large glass hall in which to put art is not possibly the most sensible place to start if you're thinking of collections. Mies was aware of this and was challenged to it, and his response was that the idea was so fascinating that he felt obliged to pursue it. You know, the building is two parts, the temple and sitting on a socle. And effectively, the museum is in the socle. It's a duck paddling very hard under the water, and all the hard work is downstairs in a rather mundane, very straightforward series of exhibition spaces which open onto a very nice garden. The temple, in a way, is the great gesture, and I think the great risk, because museologically what do you do with it? We're often asked, why would we do a project like this? There was nothing in it for us, a sort of a heroic repair job. I think there's a number of responses to that. First of all, I'm not sure I would do it to any building, but clearly restoring Mies's building was, had a certain honor and responsibility to it. More philosophically, I would say that although I and my partners and my practice are committed modernist architects and believe in architecture, although I'm very convinced we have to slightly rethink our professional trajectory or our priorities as professionals. But there is a process of collaboration in projects like this. And what I mean by that is that architectural operation of any sort requires an enormous group of people. You need clients to pay for it, you need authorities to approve it, you need contractors to build it. You should need citizens to be engaged in that process as well, although I think we've been very lax in finding convincing methods of participation, but I think it's something that our profession has to focus on going forward. As an architect, you find yourself promoting your product, your vision, and invariably yourself through that. And it often becomes sort of exhausting because you're trying to find ideas and you're trying to make those ideas relevant to others. But it tends to be, you're tending to having to push something which doesn't yet exist, and you're having to persuade people about how good it might be. And I don't know why, but for some reason, people don't trust architects. There was one phenomenal challenge. That was the impossibly poor performance of this glass box in thermal and environmental terms. And so the building for the last 40, 50 years has been accumulating condensation inside. It's been rusting, it's been expanding, and it's been challenging the inside environment. One of our big visible tasks was, do we protect the future climate of the building, or do we protect the heritage of Mises' architecture, which unfortunately comes down to millimeters. It's not an architecture where you can tuck a little bit of insulation. You know, when we did when we rebuilt the Neues Museum, we could find spaces. I mean, although we didn't, you know, we treated it like a Pompeian ruin, there are moments where you can look for. There's not much space in, you know, you can't fit a credit card in between Mises' details. And therefore, if we had really corrected his technical mistake, we would have destroyed the building. The window mullions, instead of being that big, would have been this big, would have been unrecognizable. We had to cut our way through that moral, philosophical, intellectual jungle and lead people through that. And I think that was an incredibly difficult task. Our insistence to hold on to a ruin was continuously challenged, technically, philosophically, all sorts of things. However, we're really talking about ideas. And so under that umbrella, you can really roll your sleeves up and see these discussions. There is space for meaning. What do these mullions mean if we modify them that way? What does the original paint, which was our insistence to keep, mean? What does it mean to keep 35,000 pieces of the building as opposed to just replacing them? We could have easily replaced all of the pieces. Why not throw the old ones away and get the new ones? We insisted that every piece of stone was lifted carefully, the broken ones should be repaired, and everything should be put back. That's a completely understandable attitude for a 19th century, 18th century building, because it's accepted that that material has meaning. But quite difficult to explain that material from a much more recent period and material which is much more contemporary carries any meaning with it. Why would the original piece of steel mean anything more than another piece which would be identical? It was a fascinating discussion and an important discussion, and brings us, you know, I think, into why such projects are fascinating. If the climate around that project has the patience to deal with it. And as I say, I think we've been extremely fortunate to be in the center of a sort of PhD you know, paper on the meaning of fabric, the importance of memory, and to what degree does restoration and replacement, you know, to what degree does the holding on of the idea of the building, is that represented just by the way it looks or the way it's made? So, you know, these are all fascinating. We've tended to see ourselves as sort of heroic vanguard, creating new ideas and changing the world. And I'm not sure the rest of society is really asking us to do that all the time. Are there some themes in this? Yes. Is there a theme of, shouldn't we take care of our past a bit more? Yes. I mean, shouldn't we repair things instead of replacing things? Shouldn't we make sure we don't lose the value and misunderstand the value of things, yes. This could be interpreted in other ways. It could be interpreted as saying, isn't it valid for an architect to suppress their ego for a while and polish somebody else's? Yeah, why not?
Please welcome to the stage Amy Siegel and Beatrice Galilee.
Well, Amy Siegel, it's such a pleasure that you're here to join us, especially, I think, in the context of this session, and in particular, having just heard David Chipperfield, one of the sort of paradigmatic modern architects of today, talking about maybe an attitude changing for him between architectural history, a relationship between materials and meaning, in his words.
Yeah, I could write that PhD on
right?
Material meaning, which we're about to see.
You kind of have, and I felt like, we first met when you presented your work, Provenance, at the Metropolitan Museum, and
the Museum of Intergenerational Wealth, as The Simpsons put it recently.
That's right.
Yes.
The Museum of Intergenerational Wealth.
Did everyone catch that episode? You missed an amazing episode.
And
please go
I
ahead.
felt like, you amongst many others are actually moving that paradigm shift, helping to talk about architecture in ways that architects haven't felt comfortable in, removing this sort of the sense of autonomy between architects and their buildings that has been the sort of guiding force of a lot of conversations around 20th century architects, the master architect. And I think a lot of what you're trying to do, or what I sort of interpret as an architecture curator in your work, is this storytelling around, actually, no, there is it's a fundamental interdependence of architecture and almost every other, component part of making a building. What do you think? Does that make sense to you? And would you share with us maybe an early piece that could also answer for you?
Yeah. Well, I think I approach it as an artist, in the sense that I'm interested in material as an artist is interested in material, meaning, or perhaps a contemporary artist in that sense, myself being, I'm interested in the sort of unconscious of the material. I'm interested in its kind of socioeconomic value. Why do we read value in the material at all? Not just its visual phenomenon, which is one layer, but sort of the underlayers of the kind of economic flow that the material itself might suggest or promote or be a part of, in the production and the use of material. So in that sense, like, maybe I'm even approaching it like a genre, right? So it sort of exists in quotations for me. I'm not being necessarily romantic or precious about it. I'm kind of dealing with it almost forensically. And in the first kind of instance that we've discussed or looked at in this kind of very particular line of my work, which looks at certain kind of material processes, is marble. And I've made several pieces now that started with a kind of fascination with the largest marble quarry in the world, or I should say the largest underground marble quarry in the world, because most marble quarries are mountainside, and it's in Vermont. And it has resurfaced many of the more recently kind of luxury architecture, residential architecture buildings of New York, and interiors as well. But it started out as, it's the quarry that built Washington, D.C., for example, and many of the monuments and buildings there. So my interest I made a piece in 2015, a film called Quarry, which you can see in this instance, the exhibition view is at the South London Gallery. It was actually originally commissioned for an exhibition at the Haus der Kultur und der Welt in Berlin called Wohnungsfrage, or the housing question, which was curated by a huge team, including Nikolaus Hirsch and Hilla Peleg. But in Quarry, basically we follow the production. The film starts in, it's another exhibition view, the film starts in the underground kind of underground quarry. It's a unique place, not just because it's a mile underground. And you can see here, hopefully, that the walls are already kind of quartered out to produce the marble. But then as you go kind of higher up on that mile depth, you get to the factory, which is also underground. So it's a kind of unusual place that combines the quarrying and the cutting and polishing of the marble all together. And my piece, so it starts in, the first half is sort of in the quarry, and then the second half is in the speculative model apartments in Manhattan. So not real apartments, but apartments that are built by developers, model showroom apartments built by developers into office buildings to project the vision of the materials and the layout of the building yet to be built. So they can sell the multi-million-dollar apartments in advance and thus fund, the production of the building. And so you can see the marble from the quarry deployed in the very kind of quotidian spaces of kitchen backsplashes and so forth. Here's a model apartment where you can see the kind of bronze window in front is the window of the building to be built, while the silver window behind it is the office building window, the actual real window. And then you have the model of the building, which is now built, of course, because this piece is from 2015. So not all of those projects were built, but most of them were built over on the West Side Highway there. So we could actually watch a little clip from Quarry. Can we have the lights down? So maybe it might be interesting to know that the project actually started in a very particular way, just about, I guess, about 35 blocks south of here, which is when I went around and visited these kind of speculative showrooms first with my producer, Andy Feerberg, and one of them, which was at the time the showroom for the then unbuilt 432 Park Avenue. And though the building didn't appear in my piece, I was incredibly inspired by a kind of thing that happened when I was there, which was that the salesperson was kind of taking us around as if we were prospective buyers, along with maybe a few other people. And when we got to the bathroom, the sort of modeled bathroom, the sink, as the salesperson told us, was a solid, massive, many-ton chunk of marble. And the basin was a void cut into this solid of marble. And as the salesperson told us, in fact, the marble was taken from the very same quarry in Carrara where Michelangelo took his marble for the Davids. And I just thought that was such like incredible bullshit, but really telling thing to say, because what it was saying is the kind of thing that interests me exactly, which is it was saying, if you buy this home, which is outfitted with this material, this highly sedimentary, compressed material, you're in fact going to be able to own and possess something that's going to have the same spiritual value in its material, physical presence as a great work of art. Oh, and the follow-up to that, I should say, is that when I called a few years later to check in with the designers on material use and so forth, they told, without my even saying anything about Italy, they said, when I asked where all the marble was from for the bathrooms, they said, oh, it's from China. So they said, yeah, there have been some substitutions.
Well, they did end up in one of your films.
Yes.
So, not that far off.
That's true.
But Amy, there was something that came up. I probably scribbled it down in some awful handwriting. That Amitov Ghosh said earlier, which was about the...
Sorry, say that again?
There's something that Amitov Ghosh said earlier, which was about the role of artists and storytellers and literature in telling non-human stories.
Yeah.
That was so beautiful, and it was something that I think really resonates, with these stories about materials, like who tells them, and like who tells the story of this marble quarry, and who, it's in what
right.
how did you respond to that, or his words when he said that?
Yeah, I found that really fascinating when you talked about non-human voices and so forth, and these questions about object-oriented ontology that I guess we used to be so preoccupied with and so forth, but I found all that really fascinating, but I have to say that in the end, I do think that all these things that we make and protect and preserve and care for and build and create do say so much about us. In the end, they point back to us. Mm-hmm. This sort of inescapable, like, human kind of endeavor and narcissism. So I thought about that during his words on screen, which I thought were lovely and quite identify with.
I would love to talk about your recent work, Asterisms, which was shown at the Sao Paulo Biennale last year. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big themes about the world around is that we try to capture things that get really made, over the past year. And I think there is certainly... I really appreciate people who can make things and get things done in these times, and it's super hard, and it's really a huge achievement, I think, for anyone living in these times to finish a project and execute it to the standards that they want. So I wanted to talk, for that reason, would love to talk to you about Asterisms and the making process of that film, and maybe you can also share a clip and talk us through a little bit about what that new piece is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see the work here, and it's a multi-channel installation. I think its most layered moments, it's about 6 channels. And what you're looking at is actually a freestanding wall that has volume. It's maybe 2 feet in depth. So it may look like a screen here in its photographic documentation, but in fact, it's a moving image work that is built on a very specially shaped wall, and the projections are sort of mapped onto it. And my interest in material and in particular in kind of geological material that is stratified became, I think, in this work operative in a couple different ways, one of which is the idea that material or geological stratification can also reflect class stratification and issues around class, luxury, and labor, and how labor functions in certain parts of the world in service of a rarefied few who benefit profit-wise, otherwise, from the work and efforts of many who are, variously exploited in the process. And that's kind of one aspect of it. But another, in a more formal sense for me as an artist, was thinking about the wall itself or the projection space as a series of layers that could accommodate a kind of simultaneous montage, one on top of the other. So there's a kind of conceptual and visual analog as well to the idea of stratification. But I should say, perhaps, it's kind of a tough piece. This is one of my first times kind of trying to encapsulate it in a few words. But so you have these many layers, but at times you only have one or two layers on screen. And the piece looks at about 5 or 6 different kind of connected segments or themes. And one of them is, for example, artificial. These are all of it focuses on the United Arab Emirates. That's where I shot the piece. And one of them is the artificial islands that were built off the coast of Dubai that many of the Emirates and other countries have also now mimicked those developments of the great failures of the credit crisis. So we kind of think of them now. And then the kind of springing off from that, ideas around sand and sedimentation and desertification as that continues, as well as erosion and the kind of constant maintenance of those islands that happens. So as those islands are being, they've been built up, but they're also constantly sifting away. And so then they have to be built up again, and then they sift away. So there's a kind of a strange Sisyphean task to the ongoing task to the production of those islands. You know, they didn't happen and then just stop. We also look at gold factory, and in this instance, this is a oil engineering parts factory. And so it follows, the piece starts, it follows a kind of, you start in the very early morning with some of the migrant workers in the labor camp where they live, and then you go to work with them, and then you sort of make your way up through the capitalist management pyramid, as it were, starting with, you know, the workers in the factory floor, and then going to the managerial class at lunch, and then you actually go home with the owner of the company to his penthouse skyscraper in Dubai. That's from the gold factory. An image from that penthouse view of Dubai. And there's also a collection of, a royal collection of Arabian horses that are featured in the work, which may seem sort of a bit disparate, but in fact, if I'm thinking about materials and processes and things that are, how value is produced, value is also produced around creatures, you know, who are maintained, bought and sold, auctioned, shown, also, you know, historically treated with, you know, in a kind of mythology of tremendous honor and loyalty. So there's a real complexity, I think, to that part of the piece, as well as the horse's primal relationship to the history of cinema in terms of movement and Muybridge. Yeah, so let's see. This is the first clip. Can we get the lights down? Thanks. I think we should go back to the image of asterisms, the exhibition view. we won't talk about this just yet. Thanks. So I should say perhaps that, so what you just saw in terms of the clip is an abandoned village that was is called Al Madam, and it's part of the Emirate of Sharjah. And there the sand has taken over. The village was abandoned because they could not handle the direction that the sand was coming in. Talk about desertification. I mean, it's literally taking over, and the maintenance of the houses and the spaces became too much, and it was just left, left to the environment in that way.
Amy, I'd love to see more from the film, and we have probably like 5 more minutes or something to keep chatting. But I would love to. Do you think we could see maybe one more clip?
Yeah.
Would that be fine?
Why not?
I'm kind of
Yeah.
excited to see more.
Yeah. Why don't we just go to the second clip?
So Amy, the film takes us through all these particular contexts, and as you've talked us through these incredible drone shots. I would maybe you could say a couple of things about the way that you produce these, your research, but also your filming techniques, and also I know you touched on it briefly, but I think it would be interesting again to talk about this layering and this display, particularly when it comes to architecture and land. And how did you make this film ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, I've become very interested in how the drone seems to be the contemporary perspective. It's like the perspective of our time in this moment, it feels like. I mean, in part because the drone is accessible in the sense that it's a toy, and you can send it up, and even though you're supposed to get permits to do that, but it's sort of all over. I mean, I used, for example, I was looking at the drone footage of, there's this kind of ridiculous, sorry, I shouldn't say that. There's an activity that seems popular in the Emirates, at least popular for those who are, a certain class, which is a dune bashing, where you go in these kind of giant cars and you kind of bash into the sand. And I was watching these dudes videos of it on, dudes. I would call them dudes because those are the folks who do the dune bashing, right? The dune dudes. Anyway, I get really going off on a tangent here. Anyhow, the point being, I was watching their videos on YouTube. They would post, hey man, I was out there and here's what we did today. And they send up their drones to film themselves doing this kind of bashing, and that's how I found the sand village Al Madam, because I started to see that there was something in the corner of the videos, and then I saw that they had geotagged their videos. So then I looked at, okay, let me see if I can find the village. And then when I was there, I just literally did it by coordinates. And so we kind of went out and looked for it and found it that way. But, all of which is to say that, you know, if you think of it on a kind of democratic plane, it's like everybody is using a drone, but it's very interesting to think about the drone in terms of the perspective that it gives in this time that we're thinking so much about like very different geological timescales, right? And the kind of concern with future timescales and how far into the future can we actually project ourselves at this point, and reconciling ourselves to like climate reality. And it seems like there's a correspondence between the scale that the drone affords, you know, in terms of the view and the perspective, and this moment, as well as perhaps a kind of, if you want to equate the drone also to a kind of godlike perspective, there's a tremendous, you know, sense of, yeah, kind of individual narcissism that goes along with it. So it's sort of twofold in that way. Anyhow, so I was interested in using the drone to kind of play off of that a little bit, but also to use it in my work. I often use the kind of tracking shot, the sort of parallel tracking shot, to examine things in let's say, like an almost forensic way. And the drone sort of allowed me to do that, but to create that, you know, on a scale that is sort of like you would have needed a helicopter to do 10 years ago. And a tremendous amount of fuel, and it's incredibly wasteful and, you know, expensive.
Amy, we could talk all night, but unfortunately we have to kind of wrap so we can have a break and then go to our last session. But
do you want to
maybe
do you want to play the last clip, because
yeah.
that's the thing I think that gives more evidence to the layers.
Yeah.
And we could go out. We could go out.
So I
with
think
that.
we're gonna say
sail out with that.
Yes, sail out with that. Thank you so much, Amy Siegel. So we'll see one more clip and then we'll pass on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody.
I just wanted to say thanks so much, and thank you for being here. And that great music was composed by Jeff Mirko. I also wanted to add in there. So thank you, Beatrice, for inviting me.
Of course. So we'll have a short break. We'll be back at 4:30 for our final session. There's not much more to go. The final session's a bit shorter, so thank you very much for sticking with us, and thank you to our sponsors, Meta Open Arts, to Amura, whose furniture this is, and to our partners, Het Nieuw Institute, and to the Guggenheim, and see you all very soon. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody.